It started like any ordinary night. 2 cops, a routine stop, and a man driving through town after dinner. But within minutes, that routine stop turned into the mistake of a lifetime because the man they'd handcuffed wasn't a criminal at all. He was one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States military. The night was still, just past 9:30, when General Anthony Caldwell pulled into the cracked parking lot of Lou's Country Diner off Highway 281 in Marble Falls, Texas. He'd been driving for hours, heading back to San Antonio after speaking at a veterans fundraiser in Dallas. His stomach grumbled, his shoulders ached, and all he wanted was a cup of black coffee and maybe a slice of pie before finishing the last stretch home. He parked his charcoal gray Lincoln Navigator near the diner's neon sign, which flickered like it was trying to die but couldn't quite give up. The lot was mostly empty, a beat-up pickup, an old Chevy sedan, and a police cruiser idling near the far exit. He didn't think much of it. Small-town cops like to park near diners. Free refills and gossip were easy perks of the job. Anthony stepped out, stretching his back as the warm Texas air wrapped around him. He still wore his Air Force polo, nothing flashy, just a simple navy blue shirt with the emblem stitched over his heart. His short, cropped hair showed flecks of gray, and his calm presence had that quiet confidence that came from decades of discipline. Inside, the diner smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee, the kind of smell that clings to everything, even your thoughts. A waitress in her 50s with tired eyes smiled at him. "Evening, hun. Grab a seat anywhere you like." He smiled back. "Thanks, ma'am." Anthony chose a booth near the window. He ordered coffee, eggs, and toast, and took a deep breath, finally letting the tension of the road ease out of his shoulders. He pulled out his phone to check messages, a few from his daughter, who was in college, and a reminder about his upcoming base inspection. Normal life stuff. For a few minutes, everything was peaceful. The low hum of a country song played from an old jukebox in the corner, and the waitress refilled his cup with a smile that said she'd seen 1,000 travelers like him come and go. But then he noticed the same police cruiser from outside, driving slowly past the window. Once, twice. Then a second patrol car joined it. Both circled the lot like sharks testing the water. Anthony frowned, glancing toward the door. He told himself not to overthink it. Maybe they were just checking plates or running a routine patrol. Still, there was something about the way they kept passing that made his chest tighten. When he finished his meal and paid his bill, he left a generous tip. The waitress thanked him, and he gave a polite nod before walking back toward his SUV. The sound of crickets filled the air, but beneath it, he heard the low rumble of engines again. 2 of them. As he reached for the door handle, bright blue and red lights flashed across the asphalt. 2 patrol cars pulled up, one blocking his path forward and the other stopping just behind him. The sudden glare of spotlights hit his windshield, flooding the parking lot in harsh white light. Anthony blinked, shielding his eyes. He looked around, confused but steady. He hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't even driven off yet. 2 officers stepped out, one tall and broad with a shaved head, the other shorter, younger, maybe late 20s. Their flashlights clicked on in unison, beams cutting across his car like searchlights. "Evening, sir," the tall one called out, his hand resting near his holster. "Mind telling us what you're doing here tonight?" Anthony turned slowly, his voice calm and polite. "Just stopped for dinner." "Why?" "Car like that doesn't usually show up here," the younger one said, walking closer. His tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory. "You the owner of this vehicle?" Anthony gave a small, patient smile. "Yes, I am." "Is there a problem?" The taller cop exchanged a glance with his partner. "We got a report of a stolen SUV matching this description not too far from here." Anthony blinked once. "Stolen? That's not possible. This vehicle is registered to me. Mind showing us your license and registration?" "Of course," he said, reaching slowly for his wallet. He'd had enough encounters in life to know every movement mattered. He retrieved his license and registration, handing them over carefully. The officer snatched them with a quick, dismissive motion, glancing down at the name. "Anthony Caldwell," he read aloud. "You local?" "No, I'm based out of San Antonio. What brings you to Marble Falls?" Anthony took a slow breath. "Dinner. I've been driving since this afternoon." The younger officer circled around the vehicle, shining his flashlight through the windows like he was looking for something or someone. "Mind if I ask what you do for a living?" I'm with the United States Air Force, Anthony said. The tall officer smirked faintly. That so? Yes, sir, Anthony replied, keeping his tone even. I'm a general. The younger cop laughed, shaking his head. A general, huh? Driving through Marble Falls in the middle of the night, eating at Lou's Diner. That's a new one. Anthony didn't flinch. It's true. I just left a fundraiser in Dallas. Sure you did, the tall one said, tapping the license against his flashlight. You got military ID on you? I do. Anthony reached carefully into his jacket pocket and pulled out his credentials. His official military identification card, complete with the Department of Defense seal. He held it up for them to see, but neither officer took it. Instead, the younger one tilted his head, smirking. That's a good fake, I'll give you that. Anthony's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice stayed calm. It's not fake. You can call the Pentagon and confirm. The tall officer crossed his arms. We'll handle this our way. Anthony stood silently beside his car, the lights glaring, the air thick with suspicion. He'd faced hostile rooms before, foreign generals, congressional hearings. But this was different. It was personal. But just as he started to speak again, one of the officers placed a hand on his shoulder, firm, uninvited, and full of intent. The officer's hand stayed heavy on Anthony's shoulder, that kind of grip that says you're not in control anymore. Anthony glanced down at it, then up into the man's eyes, calm, steady. He'd led airmen in combat zones. He wasn't about to lose his temper in a parking lot. Sir, he said evenly, I don't appreciate being handled like this. I've complied with every request. The tall one, his badge read Deputy Kyle Henson, narrowed his eyes. Relax, General. We're just making sure everything checks out. The sarcasm in his voice stretched the word general into something ugly. Anthony took a slow breath. Then please run the plate. Call it in, you'll see it's registered to me through the Department of Defense. The younger cop, Officer Troy McDermott, circled back around the SUV. Mind popping the trunk? Anthony frowned. Why would I need to do that? McDermott shrugged. Standard procedure. You said you're military. Could be transporting government property. Anthony's tone stayed patient, but there was an edge now. That's not how this works, officer. I'm not under investigation. You have no probable cause. McDermott snorted. Probable cause is what I say it is. Inside the diner, a couple of customers pressed their faces to the window. The waitress, Clara Jenkins, stood frozen behind the counter, whispering to a co-worker. Anthony saw her reflection in the glass, worried, uneasy, before turning his attention back to the two officers. Henson stepped closer, the smell of stale coffee and chewing tobacco following him. Listen, I don't care if you're a general, a senator, or the Pope himself. If this car's stolen, you're coming with us. Anthony's patience was thinning. He raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. You're making a mistake. All you have to do is call the number on the back of that ID. They'll verify it in seconds. Henson scoffed. I'm not calling anyone in D.C. over a traffic stop in Marble Falls. You'd rather risk detaining a United States officer without verification? Don't tell me how to do my job, Henson snapped. McDermott came around the side, flashlight beam bouncing off the hood. Car looks too new, too clean. You sure you can afford something like this on a government paycheck? Anthony stared at him for a moment. That's an inappropriate question. Just making conversation, McDermott said, smirking. You military guys get touchy real quick. Anthony exhaled, eyes flicking briefly toward the diner again. A few more people were standing at the window now. Some had their phones up, recording. He didn't blame them. If he were watching this happen to someone else, he'd want evidence too. Henson leaned toward his partner. Go ahead, run his info. McDermott took the license and ID back to the patrol car. The radio crackled faintly inside as he typed on the laptop. Anthony stood still beside his SUV, the diner's neon lights casting a flicker across his face. Henson paced in front of him. You know, you're awfully calm for someone accused of stealing a vehicle. Anthony's reply came quiet, measured. I've learned that losing your temper doesn't solve much. Guess they teach that at the Air Force Charm School, Henson muttered. Minutes dragged by. McDermott returned, shaking his head. Can't find anything under this license number. It's not matching our system. Anthony's brow furrowed. That's because military IDs don't go through your local DMV. They're verified federally. You need to contact the Defense Personnel Database. McDermott looked at Henson. That's what someone with a fake ID would say. Anthony's heart rate ticked up, but his voice stayed even. Officers, I am giving you a direct, lawful instruction. Verify my credentials through the Pentagon operator. I will provide the number. Yeah, we'll get right on that, Henson said with a smirk. He turned his head slightly. Put your hands on the hood. Anthony blinked, almost in disbelief. Excuse me? You heard me. He hesitated. You have no grounds for detainment. Henson took a step forward. Sir, I'm not going to say it again. Anthony met his eyes, steady but firm. You're violating protocol. I am a federal officer. Before he could finish, Henson's hand was on his arm again, rougher this time. Hands on the hood now. Anthony slowly complied, placing his palms flat on the cool metal. McDermott stepped up behind him, pulling his wrists back. The metallic click of handcuffs cut through the night air. Unbelievable, Anthony muttered under his breath. Yeah, McDermott replied, voice dripping with smug satisfaction. Can't believe a general is out here getting arrested for grand theft auto. Henson chuckled low. Guess rank doesn't mean much out here, huh? Anthony didn't respond. His mind was already moving, calculating. He knew that the moment they tried to run a background check beyond their small-town systems, alarms would go off. The Pentagon would get the alert, but that didn't make the humiliation any easier to bear. A small crowd was gathering near the diner doors. A teenager raised his phone, recording. Anthony could hear a woman whisper, He said he's a general. Why are they cuffing him? Henson turned toward them, shouting, Back it up! This is police business. The woman flinched, but didn't move. Anthony closed his eyes briefly, a deep ache forming in his chest. Not fear, not even anger, but disappointment. Decades of service, medals, commands, and still, none of it shielded him from being seen as a threat. McDermott tightened the cuffs unnecessarily. We're taking you down to the station until we sort this out. You're making a serious mistake, Anthony said quietly. Henson smirked. We'll see about that, General. But as they started to lead him toward the patrol car, Anthony glanced over his shoulder and spotted a young woman at the diner door holding up her phone, recording every second. The night air felt heavier now, pressing against the scene like an invisible weight. The cuffs dug into Anthony's wrists as the two officers guided him toward the patrol car. Every step echoed across the empty lot. He wasn't resisting, but they treated him like he might bolt at any second. Watch your head, McDermott said sharply, shoving him just enough to make the point. Anthony sat in the back seat, the door slamming shut beside him. The partition's mesh screen separated him from the front, a barrier that made him feel less like a citizen, more like a criminal. Through the glass, he could still see the diner, the glow of neon flickering against the chrome. People were still watching, still filming. Inside, Clara Jenkins whispered to her coworker, He's not doing anything wrong. They're just... Shh, the other woman interrupted. You don't want no trouble with them. But Clara couldn't look away. Her phone was still recording from the window. Outside, Henson leaned against the hood of the SUV, muttering to McDermott. What do you think? McDermott asked. Henson shrugged. Doesn't matter what I think. Something's off. That ID's not in our system, and nobody just happens to drive a car like this through here. He's saying he's Air Force, McDermott said. You think he's lying? Henson's lip curled. You ever seen a general stop for scrambled eggs and gas station coffee at Lou's? Come on. Anthony could hear them through the half-open window. He leaned forward, his voice calm but loud enough. Officers, I'm telling you the truth. You need to contact defense personnel. The number's on the back of that ID card. Henson turned his head, annoyed. You keep quiet back there. We'll call who we need to call. Anthony's pulse steadied. He'd spent decades keeping his composure under fire, and tonight would be no different. You're detaining a federal officer unlawfully. This will not end well for either of you, McDermott muttered something under his breath, chuckling. Big talk for a guy in handcuffs. Henson took out his radio. Dispatch, run a check on a... Caldwell, Anthony. Says he's military. Claims rank of general. Driving a 2024 Lincoln Navigator, Texas plates. He paused, listening to static. The dispatcher replied, confused. Nothing matching. You sure about that name? Yeah, that's what the ID says, Henson replied. Try running the vehicle registration. A few seconds later, the voice came back, hesitant. Vehicles registered to the United States Air Force Logistics Command. Henson frowned. What? Looks like a government vehicle, Deputy. Comes up as secured use only. McDermott's face fell slightly. So, maybe he's telling the truth? But Henson's pride was already in the driver's seat. Could be a fake registration too. Let's not jump to conclusions. Anthony leaned toward the window. You just proved what I've been saying. That's a government vehicle. Now remove these cuffs. Henson slammed the radio back onto his belt. I said keep quiet. Anthony's tone hardened. Deputy, you've made an error in judgment. Correct it now. The words hit a nerve. Henson spun toward him, eyes flaring. Don't tell me how to do my job, sir. He yanked the back door open, gripping Anthony's shoulder. You think throwing your title around scares me? Not tonight, Anthony met his gaze evenly. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to stop you from ruining your career. McDermott shifted awkwardly beside them. Kyle, maybe we should just... Not now, Henson barked. He turned back toward Anthony. You think just because you've got some fancy ID, you're untouchable? Out here, you're just another guy who doesn't know when to stop talking. Anthony's patience cracked slightly. Out here, I'm a citizen who deserves the same respect you expect wearing that badge. That sentence landed like a punch neither man expected. For a split second, the air went still. Henson's jaw clenched, and he stepped closer, his voice low. You want to play smart? Let's take a little ride. Maybe sitting in a cell will jog your memory. McDermott's flashlight beam swung across the parking lot again, landing on Clara Jenkins, still holding her phone up near the diner window. Hey, he shouted, pointing, put that phone down. Clara froze, but didn't lower it. I'm just recording what's happening. He didn't do anything wrong. Ma'am, I said put it down. McDermott's voice rose. Anthony looked through the window, locking eyes with her for a moment. Keep recording, he said firmly, voice muffled but clear enough. Don't stop. Henson slammed the door shut again. That's it. You're done talking. He stalked toward his cruiser, muttering into his radio about transport prep. Anthony leaned back against the seat, breathing slowly. He wasn't panicking. Not yet. He knew there were procedures, systems, people who would notice when he didn't check in, but he also knew that right now, those things felt very far away. McDermott returned to the patrol car, looking uneasy. You sure about this, Kyle? His plates come up as Air Force property. If this goes bad, then it goes bad, Henson snapped. I'm not letting some guy make a fool out of me. Anthony closed his eyes briefly. It was a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. Decades of leadership, of diplomacy, of representing his country. And here he was, treated like a criminal for owning the wrong car in the wrong town. He opened his eyes again. You're digging a hole you won't climb out of, he said quietly. All it takes is one call. Henson sneered. Then make it. That was all the permission he needed. Anthony shifted slightly, his cuffed hands awkwardly reaching for the side pocket of his pants where his phone still was. McDermott moved to stop him, but Anthony lifted the phone into the air. Put that down, Henson barked. Anthony ignored him. You want to verify who I am? He said, voice rising just enough to carry. You'll get your confirmation. He tapped the screen and held the phone to his ear. This is General Anthony Caldwell. I need to be connected to Pentagon operations immediately. McDermott's face drained of color. Kyle, he's serious. Henson froze. For a second, he didn't know what to do. But before anyone could react further, a voice answered on the other end of the call. And Anthony knew that everything was about to change. Anthony pressed the phone closer to his ear. The sound of the Pentagon operator's voice came through, firm, official, and unmistakably real. General Caldwell, sir, verifying your call. Please confirm your code sequence. The officers froze. Henson's smirk slipped just slightly. McDermott blinked, realizing this wasn't the bluff they thought it was. Anthony recited his code, steady and confident, like muscle memory from years of command. This is Colonel Renee Foster, Operations Liaison. General, is everything all right? The voice said. Anthony took a slow breath, meeting the eyes of the officers who now looked unsure. Colonel Foster, I'm being unlawfully detained by 2 officers in Marble Falls, Texas. They've refused to verify my identification or release me. Please notify. Hey, Henson barked, lunging forward. In a flash of motion, he snatched the phone from Anthony's hand. That's enough. The phone hit the ground, sliding across the asphalt. Anthony stared, disbelief shifting into a colder, sharper kind of anger. "Are you out of your mind?" he asked, his voice cutting through the night like a blade. "You just interfered with a direct line to the Pentagon." Henson didn't reply. He kicked the phone toward the curb, muttering, "You don't make calls during an arrest." Not to anyone. Inside the diner, Clara Jenkins gasped, whispering to her coworker, "He was on the phone with someone important. Did you hear that?" She pushed the door open and stepped outside, her camera still rolling. "Sir," she called out nervously, "I saw that. He was talking to someone." "You shouldn't be taking his phone like that." McDermott turned toward her, panic flickering behind his irritation. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to go back inside right now." "No," she said, voice trembling but steady. "He didn't do anything wrong. You can't just—" "Back inside!" Henson barked again, stepping toward her. Clara flinched but didn't move. Her phone was still raised, the glow of her screen reflected off Henson's badge. "I'm recording this for his safety," she said. Anthony looked at her, voice calm but commanding. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't stop recording." Henson spun back toward him. "Shut your mouth." Anthony didn't. "You've already crossed a line, deputy. Every second you prolong this, you make it worse." McDermott shifted uneasily. "Kyle, maybe we should just check that ID through command." "I mean, what if nothing?" Henson snapped. "You think I'm scared of some guy flashing fake credentials?" "Fake?" Anthony's tone cut like glass. "That woman on the phone was a colonel. You can verify the number. You can call her right now." "Not my job," Henson said flatly. Anthony stared at him, the kind of stare that once quieted entire rooms full of officers. "Then I hope you're ready for what happens next." Henson turned away, pretending not to hear. McDermott glanced at his partner, then at Anthony. "Look, sir, just cooperate, and maybe this won't go any further." Anthony gave a humorless laugh. "It already has." From across the lot, Clara kept her camera trained on them. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was firm. "I'm posting this," she whispered to herself. "People need to see." The diner door opened again. 2 truckers stepped out, watching. One muttered, "That's the guy they're saying is military?" The other nodded. "Yeah, looks like it." Within minutes, the quiet parking lot had turned into an audience. A few people murmured, some yelled out questions. "Why is he in cuffs? What did he even do?" Anthony stood tall, cuffed but unbroken. He met the stares, the whispers, the disbelief, and held his ground. Years of command had taught him how to stand when others wanted him to fall. Henson, though, was unraveling. The control he thought he had was slipping away. His partner's hesitation, the crowd, the phones, all of it was turning the spotlight on him. He stepped closer to Anthony, voice low and sharp. "You think a crowd's gonna save you? You think anyone here cares who you are?" Anthony's reply was calm, but every word carried weight. "No, deputy. But when they find out who you just laid hands on, they'll care a lot." Henson's jaw tightened. He turned away again, muttering something under his breath that sounded a lot like panic dressed as pride. McDermott stared down at the ground, shifting his weight. "Kyle, come on. Let's call it in. Worst case, we get told to let him go." But Henson shook his head. "No, not until we get confirmation ourselves." Anthony almost smiled. "You already had it." McDermott's voice cracked slightly. "He's right, man. That woman on the phone, she called him General Caldwell. That's not something you just fake." Henson snapped. "Enough!" He turned toward the car, slamming his door. "We're taking him to the station. We'll figure it out there." Anthony shook his head slowly. "You're going to regret that decision." Henson ignored him and started the engine. McDermott stood outside for a second longer, staring at the phone still lying near the curb. The screen was lit, the line still open. A faint voice, calm but stern, echoed from it. "This is Colonel Foster again. General Caldwell, can you hear me?" McDermott bent down, his stomach dropping as he saw the screen display. Department of Defense, secure line active. He froze. "Kyle, you need to see this." But Henson was already pulling out of the lot, lights flashing. The sound of tires on gravel drowned out everything else. Inside the diner, Clara's voice trembled as she whispered to her recording. "He told them who he was." They didn't listen, and now they're driving off with him. But back on the ground, that phone, still connected to the Pentagon, was about to make sure this story didn't end quietly. The patrol car sped down the two-lane highway, its lights slicing through the dark Texas countryside. Inside, the air was tense and silent, except for the rhythmic blip of the siren. Anthony sat upright in the back seat, wrists bound, his reflection flashing red and blue across the glass. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The gravity of what had just happened was already in motion, bigger than the two men sitting in the front seat could possibly imagine. Back at Lou's Country Diner, Clara Jenkins crouched to pick up the fallen phone. She hesitated for a moment, then pressed it to her ear. "Hello, can you hear me?" A crisp, commanding voice answered immediately. "This is Colonel Renee Foster." "Identify yourself." Clara stammered, "My name's Clara Jenkins. I work at Lou's Diner in Marble Falls. The man who owned this phone, General Caldwell, he was just taken away by two police officers. They handcuffed him and drove off. They wouldn't listen when he told them who he was." The line went silent for a beat. Then the voice returned, calm but cold. "Stay where you are. Do not delete any footage. We'll be in contact shortly." Clara swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." She ended the call and turned to the small crowd outside. "That was the Pentagon," she whispered. "They're already on it." Within 10 minutes, Colonel Foster was on the phone with the Travis County Sheriff's Department. Within 20, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations had joined in. By the 30-minute mark, the small Marble Falls Police Department was suddenly at the center of a storm they didn't see coming. Meanwhile, inside the patrol car, McDermott finally broke the silence. "Kyle, I think we screwed up." Henson kept his eyes on the road. "We didn't screw up anything. If he's who he says he is, we'll confirm it when we get to the station." McDermott's voice rose slightly. He was on a Pentagon line. "You heard that woman call him General. That wasn't some scam call, man." "Then maybe he's good at pretending," Henson shot back. "You think guys like that don't use fake names and numbers to throw us off?" Anthony spoke up from the back seat, calm but firm. "You're talking yourselves in circles. All you had to do was make one call. Now, you've made 10 wrong ones." Henson glanced at him through the rearview mirror, eyes hard. "You think this is funny?" "No," Anthony said quietly. "I think it's sad." They pulled into the Marble Falls Police Department just before 10:15. The lot was empty except for two other cruisers and a row of streetlights buzzing faintly overhead. Henson parked near the back entrance and got out, slamming his door. McDermott hesitated before opening the back. "Sir, step out slowly." Anthony complied, silent. They guided him inside, past the receptionist's desk, into a holding area. The walls were painted off-white, the kind that made everything feel smaller and meaner. A young officer behind the desk looked up, confused. "What's this?" Henson replied, "Possible vehicle theft. Says he's some kind of general." The desk officer blinked. General, as in—" "Yeah," McDermott interrupted quickly. "We're still confirming." The younger cop frowned, but nodded. "All right, I'll log it in." Anthony stood quietly as Henson removed the cuffs. Red marks lined his wrists. He rubbed them gently, exhaling through his nose. "You're going to want to call your chief," he said. Henson gave a humorless laugh. "Why's that?" "Because in about 15 minutes, Anthony said, your phone's going to ring, and you're not going to like who's on the other end." Henson rolled his eyes, tossing the cuffs onto the counter. "Save the threats." But McDermott's phone buzzed. He glanced down and froze. It wasn't a local number. It wasn't even a regular caller ID. The screen just read, "Department of Defense, priority line." His throat went dry. Kyle?" Henson frowned. "What?" "Look at this." He turned the phone around. For the first time that night, Henson's confidence cracked. "Answer it." McDermott put it on speaker. "Marble Falls PD, Officer McDermott." A woman's voice came through, the same one from before, clipped and direct. "This is Colonel Renee Foster of the United States Air Force Operations Command. You are currently detaining General Anthony Caldwell. Confirm his immediate release." Now McDermott swallowed hard. "Ma'am, we—" "Now," she repeated, "you are in violation of federal law. This incident has been logged and recorded. Your department will be contacted by the Pentagon's legal office within the hour." Henson stepped closer, his face pale. "Colonel, if this is real—" "Oh, it's real, Deputy," she said sharply, "and you just made the worst mistake of your career." The line went dead. For a long second, no one spoke. The young officer at the desk stared, wide-eyed. McDermott's hand was shaking slightly as he put the phone down. Anthony looked between them, his voice calm but cutting. "Now, do you believe me?" Henson didn't answer. He walked off toward his office, muttering something about calling the chief. McDermott let out a long breath. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't think—" "You didn't," Anthony said. His tone wasn't cruel, just exhausted. "That's the problem." Moments later, the station phone started ringing. One, then two, then all at once. The receptionist called out, Chief Harper? You're gonna want to pick this one up. It's Washington." By 10:30, a full Pentagon security report was being transmitted to local authorities. Federal lines buzzed with confirmation codes, and by 11 o'clock, every major news outlet from Austin to Washington, D.C. had the story. 2 Texas officers detain Air Force general in mistaken identity case. Social media lit up. The diner footage, Clara's shaky video, hit Twitter and exploded. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Comments poured in. Unbelievable. He told them who he was. They didn't care. At the station, Chief Harper finally emerged from his office, red-faced and sweating. He looked from Anthony to Henson, then to McDermott. "Get those cuffs off him," he snapped, even though they already were. "General Caldwell, on behalf of this department, I deeply apologize." Anthony held up a hand. "Save it. You'll have your chance later." Chief Harper swallowed, nodding. "We'll, make sure everything's handled properly." Anthony's gaze didn't waver. "You'd better. Because the people who just called, they don't take this kind of mistake lightly." Outside, the flashing lights of arriving media vans began to paint the station walls. But inside, Deputy Henson's world was already collapsing, and he hadn't even seen the headlines yet. By sunrise, Marble Falls, Texas was no longer the quiet little town it had been the night before. The police station parking lot was packed, cameras, reporters, and curious locals all pressing against the barricades. The story had exploded overnight. Air Force general wrongfully detained by local police. That headline ran on every major network, from CNN to Fox. Inside the station, Chief Harper sat behind his desk with his tie half loosened, his phone ringing non-stop. He'd barely slept. Every few minutes, another call came in. Washington, Austin, the governor's office, even someone from the Pentagon's Public Affairs Division demanding statements. Deputy Kyle Henson sat stiffly across from him, eyes sunken, his badge sitting on the desk like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Officer Troy McDermott stood near the door, pale and silent, staring at the floor. Harper rubbed his forehead. "Do you two have any idea what kind of firestorm you've created?" "The Pentagon's involved. The Attorney General's calling this morning, and apparently the Air Force has already filed a formal complaint." Henson's jaw tightened. "Chief, we thought the ID was fake. The system didn't—" "I don't care what you thought," Harper snapped. "You don't touch a man who's showing you a government seal and telling you to verify through federal lines. You don't hang up on the Pentagon." McDermott swallowed. He tried to tell us. I told Kyle we should call, but..." Henson glared at him. "Don't you start. Enough!" Harper cut in, slamming his hand on the desk. The room went dead silent. "You two are suspended effective immediately. Hand over your badges and firearms." Henson's face fell. "Chief, come on." "We were just doing our jobs." "No," Harper said quietly. "You were doing what your pride told you to do." McDermott slowly unclipped his badge, setting it down next to Henson's. The metallic sound echoed across the office like a verdict. Outside the door, reporters shouted questions as Anthony Caldwell exited a conference room with Colonel Renee Foster, who had flown in overnight. Anthony wore a pressed gray suit, his posture straight but his eyes weary. The camera flashes followed his every step. "General Caldwell, do you plan to press charges?" one reporter yelled. "Will you be speaking at the Pentagon today?" another called out. Anthony didn't answer right away. He looked around the crowd, at the faces of people who, hours ago, didn't know his name, but suddenly had strong opinions about his life. Then he said quietly, "Right now, I'm more interested in accountability than revenge." The microphones buzzed. "What do you mean by that, sir?" Anthony paused, choosing his words carefully. "We can't fix what happened last night with anger, but we can learn from it, if people are willing to listen." He walked to the black SUV, waiting for him. Reporters kept calling after him, but he didn't turn around. Back inside, Harper watched the live feed on his office TV. "He's being a lot kinder than I expected," he muttered. McDermott let out a shaky sigh. "He could have ruined us by now." Henson sat motionless, staring at the floor. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. A dawning realization that the uniform he'd been so proud of no longer protected him from his own arrogance. Meanwhile, Clara Jenkins, the waitress from Lou's Diner, was sitting in her small kitchen, staring at her phone as messages poured in. Reporters wanted interviews. Strangers thanked her for recording. She hadn't planned to become a witness in a national story. She just hadn't been able to look away. Her husband walked in, rubbing his eyes. "You okay?" Clara nodded slowly. "Yeah, just thinking about what?" She looked up, eyes still on the screen. "How fast things can go wrong for someone just living their life." He didn't raise his voice once, and they still treated him like a criminal. He nodded. "Guess people will finally see what some folks deal with every day." At the same time, in Washington, D.C., the Air Force held a private meeting. Colonel Foster briefed the press secretary on the events, laying out the timeline, the recording, and the officer's refusal to verify. The clip had already become a training reference, a what not to do moment in law enforcement seminars. Later that afternoon, Anthony Caldwell sat in his hotel room in Austin, staring at his laptop. The media requests were endless. Talk shows, news panels, podcasts. Everyone wanted him to speak. He closed the screen. He didn't need attention. He wanted understanding. A knock came at the door. It was Colonel Foster. She stepped in, her expression softening slightly. "You handled yourself with grace out there, sir. Not everyone would have kept their cool." Anthony smiled faintly. "Grace doesn't come easy after years of seeing the same story play out over and over. You just learn not to let anger do the talking." She nodded. "Still, the way you stood there, you made them see something they couldn't ignore." He leaned back in his chair. "Maybe, but I wish it didn't take a uniform for people to believe a black man's word." That sentence hung heavy between them. It wasn't said with bitterness, just truth. Colonel Foster sighed. "You're right." Anthony looked out the window, sunlight cutting across the skyline. "I'll give my statement tomorrow, but not about punishment, about perspective. That's what's missing." Back in Marble Falls, Chief Harper faced the local press. His voice was tight, rehearsed, regretful. "Our department deeply regrets the events of last night. We've initiated an internal review, and both officers involved are on leave pending investigation. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities." Reporters shouted follow-up questions. "Are you issuing a public apology to General Caldwell?" "Yes," Harper said quickly. "A formal apology is being prepared." He didn't say it aloud, but everyone knew. It wasn't just about two bad decisions. It was about a system too used to assuming who's guilty before asking who's right. But while the world argued online, Anthony Caldwell was already preparing to speak, not to defend himself, but to remind everyone why respect and awareness matter long before the damage is done. 3 days later, the world had already moved fast. Too fast for a small Texas town to catch its breath. Marble Falls still buzzed with reporters and camera crews, though the police station now sat behind makeshift barricades. Signs hung from fences reading "Justice for Caldwell" and "Accountability for all." Inside a crowded conference hall in Austin, General Anthony Caldwell prepared to make his first public statement since the incident. The Air Force had urged him to let the Pentagon's PR team handle it, but he insisted on doing it himself. No podium, no teleprompter, just a microphone, a few cameras, and a quiet room full of reporters. Colonel Renee Foster stood nearby, giving him a small nod of encouragement. Anthony straightened his jacket, stepped to the mic, and looked out over the crowd. He didn't need notes. He remembered every moment. "I've been in service for 28 years, he began, his voice calm but resonant. "I've led airmen through foreign conflicts, stood in front of Congress, and represented this country with pride. But 3 nights ago, on a quiet Texas road, I was treated as if none of that mattered. Not because of what I did, but because of what I looked like." The room stayed silent. Cameras clicked softly. I identified myself. I offered verification. I even gave them direct contact with the Pentagon. They refused. Not because they didn't have the tools, but because they didn't want to believe me. He paused, glancing down for a second. When he looked up again, there was no anger in his eyes, just weight. This isn't just about me. It's about how easy it is for bias to override judgment. Two men decided that their instincts were worth more than the truth, and that decision didn't just humiliate me, it embarrassed this entire system. He let the words hang. We can't keep pretending these moments are accidents. They're choices. And every time we excuse them, we teach the next person that it's okay to look at someone and decide their story before they open their mouth. Colonel Foster watched from the side, arms crossed but eyes soft. She'd seen generals make speeches before, but this one hit different. There was something raw, unpolished, real. Anthony continued, I'm not here to destroy careers. I'm here to save consciences. Because if a man who's given half his life to this country can still be seen as a suspect, what chance does the next person have? In the front row, Clara Jenkins sat quietly, hands clasped around her phone. She hadn't expected to be invited, but when the Air Force reached out, she agreed. Her video had become part of the story, part of the reason the truth came to light. Anthony looked toward her and nodded slightly. To the woman who stood up that night, thank you. You didn't know me, but you knew wrong when you saw it. And that's all it takes sometimes. One person refusing to stay silent. Clara blinked fast, eyes wet. She mouthed a small thank you. The reporters leaned forward, hanging on every word. Now, Anthony said, people keep asking if I'll sue. If I'll demand punishment, I won't. Those officers will live with the consequences of their own decisions. Not because I punished them, but because the truth already did. What I want is something else. I want this to mean something. I want the next officer who pulls someone over to stop and think before reaching for the cuffs, to ask one more question instead of jumping to the worst conclusion. His voice softened. You can train skill. You can't train humanity. That comes from within. He stepped back from the mic. The room stayed silent for a full 5 seconds before the applause started, slow, then rising, echoing through the hall. Outside, the clip spread instantly. Within hours, news anchors were quoting his lines. Social media called it the Caldwell address. Veterans shared it. Parents shared it. Even officers across the country reposted his words. Back in Marble Falls, Deputy Henson watched the speech from his living room. His wife sat beside him, silent, her face unreadable. The man on the screen, the one he had mocked and handcuffed, spoke with the calm of someone who'd already forgiven him, but that made it worse. Henson leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. I thought I was just doing my job, he said quietly. His wife looked at him. You weren't. You were doing what you were afraid to question. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Across town, McDermott sat on his porch, replaying the video on his phone again and again. His suspension still stood, but the guilt hit harder than any punishment. He could hear Anthony's voice in his head. You didn't think. That's the problem. He muttered to himself, yeah, I didn't. Meanwhile, Clara was back at Lou's Diner. Things had changed there too. More customers, reporters stopping by for coffee, locals thanking her for recording. She didn't see herself as a hero, just someone who refused to look away. One older man sitting at the counter said, You did good, Clara. You made him see what we see every day. She smiled softly. I just did what anyone should have done. He nodded. That's the point. Later that evening, Anthony sat alone in his hotel room again, this time without the noise, without the cameras. He opened his laptop and found an email from a young cadet at the Air Force Academy. Sir, I just wanted to thank you. My father went through something similar, and seeing how you handled it gave me hope that change is possible. Anthony read it twice, then closed the screen slowly. He looked out over the city lights, letting out a long breath. Maybe that's what this was all for. Not headlines, not pity, but awareness. He whispered to himself, one story at a time. But he wasn't done yet, because the lesson he wanted to leave behind wasn't just about bias. It was about courage, grace, and what happens when people decide to see each other fully, not fearfully. A week later, General Anthony Caldwell stood at the podium of Texas State University, invited to speak to a packed auditorium of students and faculty. The event had sold out in hours, not because he was a general, but because of what he represented now, calm strength in the face of injustice. He didn't wear his uniform this time, just a dark blazer, a white shirt, and the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen both the best and worst sides of authority. The room hushed as he began. "When I was a young cadet," he said, "I thought rank would protect me. That medals and service would prove something about my character, but life has a way of reminding you that respect doesn't come from titles. It comes from how you treat people." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Last week, 2 officers saw me and decided who I was before I said a word. They didn't see a veteran, a leader, or a father. They saw a suspect, and when I tried to explain, they doubled down. That's what pride does. It convinces you that admitting a mistake makes you weak, when in truth, it's the only thing that makes you strong." The students listened closely. A few took notes, others just stared. The kind of stare that comes when truth hits harder than comfort. Anthony continued, "I don't hate those officers. I've seen what hate does to people. It eats away at your ability to grow. What I felt wasn't hate. It was disappointment. Because ignorance isn't always loud and violent. Sometimes it wears a badge. Sometimes it wears a suit. Sometimes it lives quietly inside people who never stop to question themselves." He glanced at the crowd. "You know what I learned that night? Power doesn't show who you are. It reveals it. Give a person authority and you'll see their real reflection. That's why the measure of any man isn't what he demands from others, but what he gives when no one's watching." The room stayed silent, except for the creak of a chair in the back. He took a breath and looked down for a moment, remembering the flash of those patrol lights, the weight of the cuffs, the disbelief in their eyes. Then he lifted his gaze again. "Some people ask me why I didn't fight back harder, why I stayed calm. The truth is, I wasn't fighting for me. I was fighting for the next person who gets pulled over, the next kid who gets questioned, the next man who doesn't have the uniform or the rank to prove his worth." A few heads nodded in the audience. Anthony's voice softened. "If you want to change the world, start by seeing people for who they are, not what they look like. Because one assumption, one word, one action, it can break a life. But one moment of courage can save it." He looked over the sea of faces, students from every background, every story. Don't wait for someone else to do the right thing first. Be that person, whether you're in uniform or not. He stepped back from the podium and smiled faintly. "And if you ever find yourself in a position of power, remember this. Respect doesn't cost you anything, but withholding it can cost you everything." The audience rose to their feet. The applause started slow, then built until it filled the hall like thunder. Anthony didn't wave or bow. He simply nodded once, quietly, and stepped off the stage. Afterward, a young man caught up with him in the hallway. He was maybe 19, wearing a police academy jacket. His voice shook slightly. "Sir," he said, "I'm in training to be an officer. And I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Not for something I did, but for the times I didn't speak up when others did wrong." Anthony put a hand on his shoulder. "Then don't stay silent next time." That's how change starts. Not with guilt, but with courage. The young man nodded, eyes glistening. "Yes, sir." Anthony smiled and walked out into the sunlight. The air felt cleaner that day, like the world had taken a small, necessary breath. He looked up at the sky, the same sky he'd flown under for decades, and whispered softly, "Still worth fighting for." A few feet away, a journalist approached, microphone ready. "General Caldwell, one last question. What do you hope people take from your story?" He looked straight into the camera. "I hope they understand that doing the right thing isn't about fear or punishment. It's about decency. It's about remembering that behind every uniform, every title, and every skin color, there's a human being just trying to be seen." He paused. "And if you're watching this, don't wait for permission to stand up for someone. You might be the only witness they have." The screen faded to black. The words appeared across the bottom. "Change begins when silence ends." If you believe in fairness, speak up when you see injustice, even when it's uncomfortable. If you wear a badge, remember that it's meant to protect, not to punish. And if you've ever been judged unfairly, don't let that define your worth. Let it strengthen your voice. Share this story. Start a conversation. Change starts with awareness, but it lasts through action. Because justice doesn't start in the courtroom. It starts in how we treat each other,